Welcome to the Past People, where I will talk about the people of the past. Treason was one of the most atrocious crimes in medieval England, and therefore it needed a punishment that would reflect the true atrocity to horrify and deter bystanders. Hanging, drawing and quartering, known as the three deaths, was reserved only for the worst of criminals, the traitors. Treason was worse than murder, as it was a challenge against the God-given direction of kingdom and society. The Treason Act of 1351 explains treason as conspiracy to kill or rebel against a sovereign and monarchy. The process was so barbaric that it could only be used against men. Otherwise, the executioner would be accused of rape and would instead be burned at the stake or beheaded. Traitors were seen as unhuman, and that is why they were treated as such. Their behaviour was perceived so abnormal that no normal man would ever meet the three deaths, and those that do would be subjected to brutality and torture. The process of being hung, drawn and quartered was a prolonged, multi-step one of torture and brutality in front of the largest crowds of bystanders. The process was celebrated as the ultimate punishment, and crowds were eager to see such an atrocious men be punished. The drawing was the first death. The traitor would be dragged to their place of execution by horse-drawn carriage, while being lashed for hours during this journey, leaving them with agonizing lacerations to their body. This was the first stage, before the inevitable agonizing death was to come. The second death was to be hung, but not from a great height, as the executioner did not want to break their neck, as this would cut short the spectacle. They were often asphyxiated on a ladder with a rope tied around their neck. They would flail around until just before they would lose consciousness. This is when they would have their stomach cut open to reveal their bowels, as well as removing and burning their nether regions. The third death was when the traitor would be quartered. Their body was already weakened when it was disembowelled, and so when each limb was tied to a different horse and they ran in different directions, the body would tear easily apart. The pieces of the corpse would then be displaced across the country, with the head often displayed at London Bridge to discourage further betrayals of the monarchy. Horses were not always used. Sometimes the body was just dismembered into 4 parts and the head would be displayed at the Tower of London. It is alleged that the severed limbs were parboiled in a blend of spices intended to preserve the flesh for as long as possible, so that the body parts could be taken on a public tour to further terrify and deter more traitors. This was the king or queen's way of ensuring that the monarchy would not be overthrown and their power would not be challenged. In 1241, a man named William Marcy, the son of an English nobleman, was convicted of one of the worst atrocities against a country, piracy. William Wallace ignited an uprising against the English government, and so he was to suffer the brutal act of being ripped apart into 4 pieces. Other well-known men to suffer this atrocious death: Hugh Despenser the Younger in 1326, Francis Derriman, and a number of those involved in the Babington plot against Elizabeth I, and one of the courtiers alleged to have been in love with Catherine Howard, the 5th of Henry VIII's 6 wives. Guy Fawkes was found guilty of treason for his gunpowder plot in 1605, and on the 31st of January 1606, Fawkes was taken to Westminster and sentenced to be hung, drawn and quartered, but he managed to escape the horrific parts of torture, instead jumping during the second step of hanging, therefore breaking his neck. His body was still mutilated and split into 4, but he was long gone before this happened. His corpse was displaced at the 4 corners of the kingdom. In 1782, David Tirry, who worked as a naval clerk in Portsmouth, was convicted of high treason. He had been allegedly giving France secret information. He was therefore sentenced to the 3 deaths in front of a crowd of 100,000 in the city of Portsmouth on the Southsea Common. The newspaper recorded this event. After hanging exactly 22 minutes, he was lowered upon the sledge and the sentence literally put in execution. His head was severed from his body, his heart taken out and burnt, his privities cut off, his body quartered. He was then put into a coffin and buried among the pebbles by the seaside. But no sooner had the officers retired, but the sailors dug up the coffin, took out the body and cut it into 1,000 pieces, everyone carrying away a piece of his body to strew the messmates on board. A more dreadful, affecting execution was perhaps never seen. By the 19th century, it was rare for the 3 deaths to be carried out even when sentenced, and the number of acts of treason reduced. In 1870, the longest tradition of hanging, drawing and quartering was officially removed from English law as part of the Forfeiture Act of 1870. Please comment, like and subscribe if you wish for more stories, and leave your suggestions below and I will endeavour to cover them.